Welcome to The Conversation. My name is Shannon Taylor, and I'm the Executive Director of Blacks and Jews in Conversation. And with me this evening is none other than our old friend, and a true friend he is, Jim Bessman, the editor, contributing columnist of Billboard magazine for I don't know how many past decades. Now he's freelance and on the masthead of Billboard and roving all over New York City and the country with all his disciples and the many musicians and performers whose careers he jump-started and kept on track of, none the least of which was Weaver's 2, headed by my brother-in-law David Burns. You can catch him all over the country, and the initial press, of course, came from Mr. Bessman. Also a true friend of Blacks and Jews in Conversation, a devotee of many a comic, especially Jackie Mason, where I first met him. And welcome, Bill. It's been a long time, and it's good to see you again. And if you would begin by telling me some of your most favorite musicians of all different types of genres, and then we'll get into the particulars.
Well, thank you, Shannon. It's great to be here. Great to see you, as always. Favorite musicians? Boy, that is always a hard one, because there's so many of them. But I made a list, and at the top of it is Tony Bennett, so I'm going to start right there. Tony Bennett, one of my all-time favorites, one of so many of our all-time favorites. And of course, I mean, you got to say, I would have to say the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the obvious ones, but after the obvious ones, there'd be Elvis Costello, there'd be Ashford and Simpson, there'd be John Fogerty, all kinds of people. I'm looking at my list, and there's just a number of ones that you may have heard of, some that you may not have. Doug Kershaw, Cajun musician, another Cajun musician, Joel Saunier. Jane Siberry, a Canadian singer-songwriter that some people have heard of from movies she's done songs for. Alison Krauss, the bluegrass fiddler who's won more Grammy Awards than any other woman, even more than Aretha Franklin. It goes on, all kinds of different genres. From India, there's the classical Indian violinist L. Subramaniam. There's a Bhangra singer from the Punjabi region named Daler Mendi. Again, I go on and on and on. Neshama Karlovac, we went to see her once, I believe, didn't we, Shannon?
We went, you took me, let's put it that way.
Yeah,
You took me to the theater here on the west side. It's moving soon. It's going to someplace else. I believe Mr. Steinhardt of Generous Heart founded the place. McCore. And I brought Erwin Corey there another time to hear F. Murray Abraham had a panel, well distinguished, on his unfortunate selection of doing The Merchant of Venice and Shylock, and Erwin, who was a guest here, did the whole panel in on that anti-Semitic work and that work of hatred against Jews, and that comedy role that was performed by the Nazis more than anything they ever did during the war. But Neshama was a much happier sound to hear in that whole. And are you familiar with the movie in which she put some of her father's music?
I don't think I am, actually. What movie is that?
I think I blotted it out of my mind because they had every possible travesty of a Seder taking place. Michael Lerner was in it. And they had Jesus at the Seder table. They were trying to make peace through Jesus, and every other terrible thing going on. To hear Rabbi Kalbach's music in the background, I understand you want to promote the music, but that wasn't the vehicle. So I was disappointed with Neshama. But she performed for us in the courts, gratis, in Brooklyn for the Holocaust, this Jewish month. And so she came from Canada to do it. She and her family are old friends.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about yourself, Bill. Tell me your background in music.
My background goes back to Madison, Wisconsin, which is where I'm from, and it goes back. Now I have to pause and think how far back it goes. It was the mid-'70s, probably around either 75 or 76, after taking a trip to Nashville, being a big country music fan, and at the time I was employed by the state of Wisconsin as a typist, of all things, being that was the only thing I knew how to do. I came back from this little vacation and immediately, or within a couple weeks, met a guy who was putting out a little throwaway music paper. It was called the Mad City Music Guide. Madison was then known, and it probably still is, as the Mad City. It is a big party town. And I ran into the guy at a bar where there was music playing. Actually, the band was Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes. And they had a special guest star on that tour named Ronnie Spector. Ronnie just went into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with her wonderful, famous girl group, the Ronettes. And I ran into the publisher of this. It was just a little thing that would be stacked up on the cigarette machines when they still had cigarette machines at bars. And it was called the Mad City Music Sheet. The editor and publisher was a guy named Gary Summers, who now is quite well known on some TV stations. He does appraisals. I know there's that antique show. I think he's been involved in that. Anyway, I went up to him. I thanked him for his paper, told him that I was at this show because I had read about it in his paper. And he said, well, why don't you write for it? And I said, well, Gary, I don't know how to write. He said, it doesn't matter. And you know what? He was absolutely right, because here, 25, 30 years later, I'm writing and I still don't know how to write. So
You're just much too modest. If you weren't able to write that well, the first article would have been your last, and you certainly wouldn't have been the editor for so long on Billboard.
Well, I wasn't the editor. I was an editor. I don't want to take too much credit. But
an editor, on every other page I saw an article from you. And when you told me that you had an article about the Weavers or about us in the paper, and I kept seeing your name with one article after another and not about us, I was getting madder by the time. Finally, I reached the end of the magazine, and there it was about us again with you.
Well, I actually have to thank you for that, because I wouldn't have known about the Weavers, too, had you not told me about them. And they were just wonderful. And I got to see them at least a couple times, and I was delighted to get to write about them. What a wonderful, wonderful group.
Well, Pete Seeger came to perform in Queens with the Courts, with 250 kids from all over Queens high schools, and all the top judges came. Judge Lerner, Judge Bundy Smith from the Court of Appeals, Judge Lerner now in the Pell Division, retired, and we had Mandarin interpreters, and he sang all of his songs that are now being heard by Bruce Springsteen, of all people. And
That's right.
And David came with his friend Randy, and we had blacks and Jews performers with our moot court teams, with various judges. Also in Queens, because that's one borough left that is still so racially mixed. Mm-hmm. Do you find, when you've gone to concerts, that you see at all the concerts a racially and religiously mixed profile, or do you find that people stick to their own music, and basically, no matter what the music is, there will be, whether you have ethnic music, there will be predominantly that ethnic community there?
Very good question, actually. I think it probably still is pretty strongly ethnic or genre-specific, according to what that particular genre serves, be it an ethnic group or an age group or whatever kind of a demographic. Though there is some mix, there's definitely more of a mix. Obviously, hip-hop, we all know, has an appeal way beyond the urban areas that spawned it. So it depends on the genre. We mentioned Neshama Karlbach. When I go see Neshama, and I say this regretfully, it's still pretty much the group of people, mostly Jewish people, that would know her through her father and then through her. But unfortunately, there aren't probably a lot of other people that would listen to her. Then again, she sings primarily in Hebrew or Yiddish, so the chances of her expanding to a more general demographic are not big. But I think, to answer your question again, it is pretty much still whoever that music is directed to is the kind of people that go to hear it.
Well, if I was to, I think plenty of Jews go to all different ethnic base. I have gone as an ethnomusicologist to, and I studied it since college, when it first really got it into its own. I go to many concerts where the language is performed in other than English. Mm-hmm. The opera is sung often in other than English, was the longest time before you saw translations.
Yes.
So I think people could get used to Hebrew and Yiddish. Certainly Yiddish is very funny and is accepted in mainstream English very quickly.
Oh, I agree, and that's a good analogy with opera, which I go to all the time as well, and God knows I sure can't speak any language other than English. But I think what you say is absolutely true. If people were to hear Neshama, to keep using that as an example, they would love her. Unfortunately, the way the media works, the chances for someone to hear Neshama are very small, because she's not on the commercial mainstream radio or television, which is where most people get their music, get a chance to experience it. To listen to Neshama, if you don't know who she is to begin with, which I didn't, someone either has to tell you about her, or you have to read about her, or just bump into her somehow, other than listening to her on the top 40 radio station or on the MTV or wherever most people generally get music these days.
Let me ask you about Tony Bennett. I met him many times in Atlantic City. Had dinner with him, and always a gracious, kind, pleasant person to be with.
Yes.
His career was reborn and reborn and reborn, and I last met him at great length before the latest issues of records. Is a musician's career dependent on what record he has out there? Because I know in entertainment the popularity comes and goes, the name comes and goes, and he seems to have found a whole new career the last 10 years. And is that dependent on his son's remarketing of him, or a new record that came out, or your promotion of him? What took place that made Tony reborn?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, because I can actually claim some credit for Tony's great resurgence in his later years. Just to keep the story rather short, he presented an award on MTV, one of their MTV Music Video Award shows. God, I can't even remember how long ago. It was in the early 90s, I believe, with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And the way that came about was I was doing a story for Billboard on a band called Candlebox. They were managed at the time by the same manager who managed the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Now my memory gets a little hazy, but in talking to the manager, I found out, and I believe it was in a conversation with the manager, that there had been some talk, because the Chili Peppers were big Tony Bennett fans, of getting Tony with them to present an MTV award. But it hadn't come together for whatever reason, and I either suggested or whatever happened, I called Danny Bennett, Tony's manager and son, and I said, you know, the Red Hot Chili Peppers want to get together with Tony to do this award presentation. Now, Danny might have known about that already, I don't remember, but he didn't know how to get a hold of the management, so I gave him the number. And anyway, what happened after that is history, because they sure enough did present that award together, which opened Tony up to the MTV audience. When Tony made his next record, which I believe was the Fred Astaire tribute, Steppin' Out, it had to be, because he did a video. He did this wonderful dance video with the song Steppin' Out, and that got tons of play on VH1. And then he made an album for MTV, MTV Unplugged. That album became the Grammy of the Year album winner that next year. And, I mean, he was off to the races. Of course, he'd been at the races for years and years and years before that, but he hadn't really transcended generations to the point where he had an appeal with the MTV audience, which this did. So I can at least say that I told Danny to call the Red Hot Chili Peppers management. Now, to get back to your original question, does an artist like Tony need to have an album, a current album that is on the charts to maintain a career? No, not necessarily. But to have it probably to the huge extent that Tony has and has had in the last 10 years or so, probably yes. But you can go any time of the week. Well, the Rolling Stones, they always have albums out, but those albums don't always do well We're seeing the Police coming back now. They don't have an album out, but they're going to be huge. That's going to be the biggest tour probably of the year. Certain bands can keep playing and playing year in, year out. They'll always have their audience, and they'll always be very successful, whether or not they have a big hit.
I was in many bands in my life. One was called the Shtetl Stompers. I'm sure you never heard of that one. But I was doing a lot of stomping. I was a lot of stomping. I'm a percussionist.
That's right. I forgot about that.
I played in Boston with all the bands and orchestras there, under the baton of Arthur Fiedler occasionally. And I was in a community band and a fireman's band in New Jersey. I was an all-state orchestra. I was in the dance band from my high school when it won first place in the all-North Jersey regional, and held at Point Pleasant, and so on and so forth. I think music is the greatest thing to bring people together as well as dance. Do you believe that the music we hear today honors the music of the past and learns from it, or is a reflection of the chaos of the world today and is trying to distance itself from the music of the past hundreds of years?
Another very good question, Shannon. I don't think music is capable of distancing itself too much, only because you can trace its history so easily. It's not like there's anything that's really ever going to be that new. There's only so many notes on a scale. Everything has to come from that. There's always a certain reaction against what it preceded, but then it all comes in cycles anyway. So it kind of turns on itself and eats itself and does all kinds of other things to itself. I think the music of today, a lot of it obviously does reflect a lot of the chaos of the time. But I grew up in the 60s, maybe you did as well, and that music also reflected the chaos of that day, which wasn't all that different, I don't think, from the chaos of today. So, tell me what the rest of that question was. I'm stumped.
Well, give me some of your favorite black artists. I love Dixieland music. I loved the early blues. I was crazy. I performed at the Apollo many times, and I love country western. I love the Irish music. Now Harry Belafonte did a whole study of Cuban mixed with African music.
Yeah.
Now the Cuban music you hear is from Cuba is released like it's been preserved in a bottle as an international treasure. Is it better to keep music in its original form? Is it good to tamper with it? What do you think of the rap music that praises violence and hatred of police and so on? Is every kind of expression in the music allowed as artistic license? Does it have an influence on people for good or for bad?
A million questions there, but remember them.
So take it away.
Remember them, because I'm going to forget them, but there's one I want to get to right away, and that is, you asked me at the beginning what black musicians I like. There is one that comes to mind right away, and since you mentioned also that you had played the Apollo, I'm going to the Apollo tomorrow night to see this group that is my favorite, Ashford and Simpson, Nicholas Ashford and Valerie Simpson. And they, as perhaps you know, wrote many of the great Motown songs that were sung by Marvin Gaye and Diana Ross and so many others, specifically Ain't No Mountain High Enough, which was a hit for Marvin Gaye and for Diana Ross. Songs like Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing. Then they wrote I'm Every Woman, which was, of course, a big hit for Chaka Khan, and then later for Whitney Houston. And Ashford and Simpson had a lot of hits on their own, most notably Solid. Another song that they wrote that was a big hit is Reach Out and Touch. I always come back to that song because the lyric, reach out and touch somebody's hand, make this world a better place if you can, to me, should have been the song that we took out of the 9/11, not what was the Lee Greenwood song that God Bless the USA. No, we should, to me, have thought more, how do we reach out and touch ourselves, other people, other cultures, that sort of a sentiment. But anyway, to me, they're the epitome of the great black music that has touched all of us on so many different levels, and coming out of Motown, which was a watershed for black music in the 60s and has continued to be hugely influential ever since. You mentioned rap music, artistic license, all those sorts of things. I do tend to feel that all expression is permissible, other than yelling fire in a theater or saying you're going to kill the president. Does that mean it is beyond criticism? Absolutely not. Should we all support it? Absolutely not. But it gets tricky to condemn an entire genre of music, or even specific kinds of music, without really giving some serious thought. Is it an artistic statement, or is it being designed as hate speech? These are things that I don't have an easy answer for, but I can say that a lot of the rap lyrics, a lot of lyrics in all kinds of music, I would personally find distasteful. Whether or not that means that they're bad, there might be others that would argue a different way.
What about the influence of Ireland's music on country western? Did it mix with native black music, or is that a pure Irish contribution?
Did Irish music mix with black music? Probably. It would certainly have. We tend to sometimes not know or forget that a lot of what has become rock and roll, we always talk about the black influence, the blues influence in particular, and some R&B on the birth of rock and roll. But that was all right next to the hillbilly music. I mean, Elvis Presley was as influenced by hillbilly music as he was by black music. That's what made him so important, actually, that he was kind of a hybrid of both kinds of forms. Both of them grew up right next to each other. There was a definite overlap and give and take. Now, there is an artist, though, that comes to mind immediately, one of my favorites, and her name is Laura Love. She lives in Seattle. She has a new record coming out, I believe, strictly internet only, but she's had several records out on various labels. She plays a kind of music that has been termed Afro-Celtic. Now, she's part African-American. She has all kinds of different ethnicities. She's a real mix. But she's also folk-oriented, folk-influenced, Celtic music influenced, which would include Irish music. And she really mixes an African and a Celtic, Irish type folk music together into a unique format. Yes, it can definitely overlap in ways that are obvious, and then in others that probably are not quite so obvious.
What about the Cuban music? What accounts for the sudden surge of interest in the music form that is exactly as it is when Castro first took over that island? Everything was boycotted. The same cars are driven, the Chevys, the buildings are the same, but the music and the musicians and the instruments were preserved with the buildings and the cars, and now it's like you opened a time warp and everybody wants to dance and sing to that music. And I remember that there was a study done that that music and African music merged at some point or developed together. Is that so?
Well, there is the phrase Afro-Cuban music, so yes, that is so to a point. Cuba and so much of the Americas were populated by African slaves that were brought over and brought their music traditions. So there is and then mixed with the native musician and traditions there too. So there is a definite kind of sound called Afro-Cuban music. Now also, though, we had a huge population of Cubans in this country, in Miami, that had left Cuba during the Castro time. So they maintained that music out of there, and of course it came throughout the rest of the country, New York in particularly. So there was a big hotbed of Cuban-derived music here all along. And of course, as the Hispanic population has increased so dramatically, so has that influence, and it has become more and more mainstream. with artists, especially someone like a Gloria Estefan, who's become a huge mainstream star, and remained true to that kind of music while popularizing it.
You mentioned Elvis Presley. Doc Pomus wrote Viva Las Vegas. Are you familiar with the works of Doc Pomus? The Magic Moment, Teenager in Love, Save the Last Dance for Me, and he seems to have written for Bruce Springsteen and others too.
I don't know that he wrote for Bruce Springsteen, but Bruce Springsteen and millions of artists would have recorded songs by him. I did know Doc, as a matter of fact, and Doc remains one of the great songwriters in rock and roll and in popular music. And all those songs that you mentioned, of course, I know them. They were huge hits when I was growing up, and they remain legendary, historic songs.
How about Middle Eastern music, the belly dancer, and Israeli folk? I just came from the Israeli folk dance festival. They were guests on this show. Why can't they catch on mainstream? There's one artist who sings in a belly dance style. She was on American Idol, but she is not a belly dancer. She just imitates it. Why do we not see this Middle Eastern and Israeli music going into mainstream? Is it Jewish animosity towards it because they're in the industry and they kept Jews off TV and movies long enough, and every Italian played a Jew, Jews played Italians. So what's doing with the Israeli Middle Eastern music that they seem to be unable to penetrate?
Well, we should mention, in addition to Israeli music, Arabic music, and this is actually, it's almost the same as, well, not quite the same as black and hillbilly music being next door to each other, because Israeli and Arabic music really are so closely intertwined in the fact, not only in that they're next to each other, but they come out of the same kind of musical traditions in so many ways. So you have an incredible Arabic music tradition that overlaps. In fact, a lot of Israeli musicians have picked up on Arabic music over the years. I don't know if it goes the other way around or not. But the reason that it doesn't get any further is simply that, and this goes for any kind of music that is not in the English language, the mainstream just doesn't get the opportunity to experience it. I don't know why that is, other than that the people that have the power over the airwaves, over the record companies, maybe they don't think that people are going to want to listen to something that's in a different language or has an exotic foreign sound. If it is in English, it comes from a different country. So we never really get the opportunity. Again, going back to what I was saying about Neshama, if you don't know where to find Neshama, you're probably not going to find her, because you don't know who she is to begin with, unless you know who she is. And you're only going to know who she is if you're part of her community.
I'm going to ask you one last question. I thank you ever much for coming here and sharing such expertise. And that is, if a person wants to break into this business, has a great song, they think, has a band, what do they do? What do you think of American Idol? I can't stand it, but my friends love it, and I know people who are super agents who say you can no longer go with your record to the local DJ. You have to have a form like American Idol, where you can all of a sudden find a vehicle to showcase yourself. But I think I'm just seeing hype, and the votes are manipulated, I believe, or something. Or, I don't know. I really, it's just my opinion. I'm not representing this, but I don't care for it. But I have a million people who love it and think that's a great opportunity. So where does a person go with a record or a song to try and get going?
Shannon, once again, your questions are very excellent. I've watched American Idol once, only because, and this was either last year or 2 years ago, my friends, my idols, heroes, Ashford and Simpson were on. I haven't seen it since. I've had no interest in it. I dislike it as much as you do. I think it's been, look, it's been great for the people who've been on it. A couple of them, like Kelly Clarkson, Carrie Underwood, have become stars, perhaps even legitimately so. But for this kind of a goofy contest show to be the means for there to be stars in music, I find distasteful. Again, I agree that Kelly Clarkson, Carrie Underwood may be legitimate. To answer your question, I don't know. However, kids know because kids use the internet. MySpace is a great place. YouTube. There are all kinds of means of getting your music out there and getting heard that I'm way too old to know about or to care about. But kids today know it, and they're doing it. And the traditional means of going to a record company, yeah, that's not happening the way it once was. Those record companies don't exist. Those means, those procedures don't exist. We live now in a digital age, and there are new means of exploiting those digital methods that I am way too old to understand, but the kids sure understand, and they're doing it. So we'd have to talk to kids to answer that question.
Again, I thank you very much, Jim Bessman, for coming here. I hope to see you again soon on this network. And
Please.
there's so many more questions to ask. And best success to you, and let the music continue. Thank you from Blacks and Jews in Conversation.
Any good?